A Trip to the Moon is a 1902 French silent film directed by Georges Méliès, inspired by a wide variety of sources, including Jules Verne's novels From the Earth to the Moon and Around the Moon. The film follows a group of astronomers who travel to the Moon in a cannon-propelled capsule, explore the Moon's surface, escape from an underground group of Selenites, and return to Earth with a captive Selenite. It features an ensemble cast of French theatrical performers, led by Méliès himself in the main role of Professor Barbenfouillis, and is filmed in the overtly theatrical style for which Méliès became famous. The film was an internationally popular success on its release, and was extensively pirated by other studios, especially in the United States. Its unusual length, lavish production values, innovative special effects, and emphasis on storytelling were markedly influential on other filmmakers and ultimately on the development of narrative film as a whole. Scholars have commented upon the film's extensive use of pataphysical and anti-imperialist satire, as well as on its wide influence on later filmmakers and its artistic significance within the French theatrical fait tradition. Though the film disappeared into obscurity after Méliès's retirement from the film industry, it was rediscovered around 1930, when Méliès's importance to the history of cinema was beginning to be recognized by film devotees. An original hand-colored print was discovered in 1993 and restored in 2011. A Trip to the Moon was named one of the 100 greatest films of the 20th century by The Village Voice, ranked 84th. The film remains the best known of the hundreds of films made by Méliès, and the moment in which the capsule lands in the moon's eye remains one of the most iconic and frequently referenced images in the history of cinema. It is widely regarded as the earliest example of the science fiction film genre and, more generally, as one of the most influential films in cinema history. Plot: at a meeting of the Astronomic Club, its president, Professor Barbenfouillis, proposes an expedition to the Moon. After addressing some dissent, 5 other brave astronomers, Nostradamus, Alcofrisbas, Omega, Micromegas, and Parapharagaranimus, agree to the plan. They build a space capsule in the shape of a bullet, and a huge cannon to shoot it into space. The astronomers embark and the capsule is fired from the cannon with the help of Marines, most of whom are played by a bevy of young women in sailors' outfits. The man in the moon watches the capsule as it approaches, and it hits him in the eye. Landing safely on the moon, the astronomers get out of the capsule and watch the Earth rise in the distance. Exhausted by their journey, they unroll their blankets and sleep. As they sleep, a comet passes, the Big Dipper appears with human faces peering out of each star. Old Saturn leans out of a window in his ringed planet, and Phoebe, goddess of the moon, appears seated in a crescent moon swing. Phoebe causes a snowfall that awakens the astronomers, and they seek shelter in a cavern where they discover giant mushrooms. One astronomer opens his umbrella. It promptly takes root and turns into a giant mushroom itself. At this point, a Selenite appears, but it is killed easily by an astronomer, as the creatures explode if they are hit with force. More Selenites appear, and it becomes increasingly difficult for the astronomers to destroy them as they are surrounded. The Selenites capture the astronomers and take them to the palace of the king. An astronomer lifts the Selenite king off his throne and throws him to the ground, causing him to explode. The astronomers run back to the capsule while continuing to hit the pursuing Selenites, and 5 get inside. The 6th astronomer, Barbenfouillis himself, uses a rope to tip the capsule over a ledge on the moon and into space. A Selenite tries to seize the capsule at the last minute. Astronomer, capsule, and Selenite fall through space and land in an ocean on Earth, where they are rescued by a ship and towed ashore.
The final sequence depicts a celebratory parade in honor of the traveler's return, including a display of the captive Selenite and the unveiling of a commemorative statue bearing the motto Labor Omnia Vincen. Cast. When a trip to the moon was made, film actors performed anonymously and no credits were given. The practice of supplying opening and closing credits in films was a later innovation. Nonetheless, the following cast details can be reconstructed from available evidence. Georges Méliès as Professor Barbenfouillis. Méliès, a pioneering French filmmaker and magician now generally regarded as the first person to recognize the potential of narrative film, had already achieved considerable success with his film versions of Cinderella and Joan of Arc. His extensive involvement in all of his films as director, producer, writer, designer, technician, publicist, editor, and often actor makes him one of the first cinematic auteurs. Speaking about his work late in life, Méliès commented, "The greatest difficulty in realizing my own ideas forced me to sometimes play the leading role in my films. I was a star without knowing I was one, since the term did not yet exist." All told, Méliès took an acting role in at least 300 of his 520 films. Bleuette Bernin as Phoebe. Méliès discovered Bernin in the 1890s, when she was performing as a singer at the Cabaret L'Enfer. She also appeared in his 1899 adaptation of Cinderella. François Lallemand as the officer of the Marines. Lallemand was one of the salaried camera operators for the Star Film Company. Henry Delanoy as the captain of the rocket. Jules Eugene Legris as the parade leader. Legris was a magician who performed at Méliès's Theatre of Stage Illusions, the Théâtre Robert Houdin in Paris. Victor André Delpierre, Fargeau, Kelm, and Brunet as the astronomers. André worked at the Théâtre de Cluny. The others were singers in French music halls. Ballet of the Théâtre du Châtelet as stars and as canon attendants. Acrobats of the Folies Bergère as Selenites. Production. Inspiration. When asked in 1930 what inspired him for A Trip to the Moon, Méliès credited Jules Verne's novels From the Earth to the Moon and Around the Moon. Cinema historians, the mid-20th century French writer Georges Méliès, first among them, have frequently suggested H.G. Wells' The First Men in the Moon, a French translation of which was published a few months before Méliès made the film, as another likely influence. Méliès argued that the first half of the film is derived from Verne and that the second half is derived from Wells. In addition to these literary sources, various film scholars have suggested that Méliès was heavily influenced by other works, especially Jacques Offenbach's operetta Le Voyage dans la Lune and the A Trip to the Moon attraction at the 1901 Pan-American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. The French film historian Thierry Lefebvre hypothesizes that Méliès drew upon both of these works, but in different ways. He appears to have taken the structure of the film, A Trip to the Moon, a moon landing, an encounter with extraterrestrials with a deformity, an underground trek, an interview with the man in the moon, and a brutal return to reality back on Earth, directly from the 1901 attraction, but also incorporated many plot elements, not to mention the parodic tone of the film, from the Offenbach operetta. Filming. As the science writer Ron Miller notes, A Trip to the Moon was one of the most complex films that Méliès had made, and had employed every trick he had learned or invented. It was his longest film at the time. Both the budget and filming duration were unusually lavish, costing 10,000 francs to make and taking 3 months to complete. The camera operators were Tessifile Michaud and Lucien Taringui, who worked on a daily basis with Méliès as salaried employees for the Star Film Company. In addition to the work as cameramen, Méliès's operators also did odd jobs for the company, such as developing film and helping to set up scenery. And another salaried operator, François Lallemand, appeared on screen as the marine officer. By contrast, Méliès hired his actors on a film-by-film basis, drawing from talented individuals in the Parisian theatrical world, with which he had many connections. They were paid $1 d'or per day, a considerably higher salary than that offered by competitors, and had a full free meal at noon with Méliès. Méliès's film studio, which he had built in Montreuil, Saint-Denis in 1897, was a greenhouse-like building with glass walls and a glass ceiling to let in as much sunlight as possible, a concept used by most still photography studios from the 1860s onward. It was built with the same dimensions as Méliès's own Tête Robert Houdin. Throughout his film career, Méliès worked on a strict schedule of planning films in the morning, filming scenes during the brightest hours of the day, tending to the film laboratory and the Tête Robert Houdin in the late afternoon, and attending performances at Parisian theaters in the evening. According to Méliès's recollections, much of the unusual cost of a trip to the moon was due to the mechanically operated scenery and the Selenite costumes in particular, which were made for the film using cardboard and canvas. Méliès himself sculpted prototypes for the heads, feet, and kneecap pieces in terracotta, and then created plaster molds for them. A specialist in mask-making used these molds to produce cardboard versions for the actors to wear. One of the backdrops for the film, showing the inside of the glass roof workshop in which the space capsule is built, was painted to look like the actual glass-roofed studio in which the film was made. Many of the special effects in A Trip to the Moon, as in numerous other Méliès films, were created using the substitution splice technique, in which the camera operator stopped filming long enough for something on screen to be altered, added, or taken away. Méliès carefully spliced the resulting shots together to create apparently magical effects, such as the transformation of the astronomers' telescopes into stools or the disappearance of the exploding Selenites in puffs of smoke. Other effects were created using theatrical means, such as stage machinery and pyrotechnics. The film also features transitional dissolves, the pseudo-tracking shot in which the camera appears to approach the man in the moon was accomplished using an effect Méliès had invented the previous year for the film The Man with the Rubber Head. Rather than attempting to move his weighty camera toward an actor, he set a pulley-operated chair upon a rail-fitted ramp, placed the actor on the chair and pulled him toward the camera. In addition to its technical practicality, this technique also allowed Méliès to control the placement of the face within the frame to a much greater degree of specificity than moving his camera allowed. A substitution splice allowed a model capsule to suddenly appear in the eye of the actor playing the moon, completing the shot. Another notable sequence in the film, the plunge of the capsule into real ocean waves filmed on location, was created through multiple exposure, with a shot of the capsule falling in front of a black background superimposed upon the footage of the ocean. The shot is followed by an underwater glimpse of the capsule floating back to the surface, created by combining a moving cardboard cutout of the capsule with an aquarium containing tadpoles and air jets. The descent of the rocket from the moon was covered in 4 shots, taking up about 20 seconds of film time.
coloring. As with at least 4% of Méliès's output, some prints of A Trip to the Moon were individually hand-colored by Elisabeth Thuilier's coloring lab in Paris. Thuilier, a former colorist of glass and celluloid products, directed a studio of 200 people painting directly on film stock with brushes, in the colors she chose and specified. Each worker was assigned a different color in assembly line style, with more than 20 separate colors often used for a single film. On average, Thuilier's lab produced about 60 hand-colored copies of a film. Music. Though Méliès's films were of course silent, they were not intended to be seen silently. Exhibitors often used a bonamento, or narrator, to explain the story as it unfolded on the screen, accompanied by sound effects and live music. Méliès himself took considerable interest in musical accompaniment for his films, and prepared special film scores for several of them, including The Kingdom of the Fairies and The Barber of Seville. However, Méliès never required a specific musical score to be used with any film, allowing exhibitors freedom to choose whatever accompaniment they felt most suitable. When the film was screened at the Olympia Music Hall in Paris in 1902, an original film score was reportedly written for it. In 1903, the English composer Ezra Reed published a piano piece called A Trip to the Moon, comic descriptive fantasia, which follows Méliès's film scene by scene and may have been used as a score for the film. It may have been commissioned by Méliès himself, who had likely met Reed on one of his trips to England. More recent composers who have recorded scores for A Trip to the Moon include Nicolas Godin and Jean-Benoit Dunclever, Frederick Hodges, Robert Israel, Eric Le Guin, Lawrence Lérisy, Donald Sosin, and Victor Young. Style. The film's style, like that of most of Méliès's other films, is deliberately theatrical. The mise-en-scène is highly stylized, recalling the traditions of the 19th century stage, and is filmed by a stationary camera, placed to evoke the perspective of an audience member sitting in a theater. This stylistic choice was one of Méliès's first and biggest innovations, although he had initially followed the popular trend of the time by making mainly actuality films. In his first few years of filming, Méliès gradually moved into the far less common genre of fictional narrative films, which he called his scenes composées, or artificially arranged scenes. The new genre was extensively influenced by Méliès's experience in theatre and magic, especially his familiarity with the popular French féerie stage tradition. In an advertisement, he proudly described the difference between his innovative films and the actualities still being made by his contemporaries. These fantastic and artistic films reproduced stage scenes and created a new genre entirely different from the ordinary cinematographic views of real people and real streets. Because A Trip to the Moon preceded the development of narrative film editing by filmmakers such as Edwin S. Porter and D. W. Griffith, it does not use the cinematic vocabulary to which American and European audiences later became accustomed. The vocabulary built on the purposeful use of techniques such as varied camera angles, intercutting, juxtapositions of shots, and other filmic ideas. Rather, each camera setup in Méliès's film is designed as a distinct dramatic scene uninterrupted by visible editing, an approach fitting the theatrical style in which the film was designed. Similarly, film scholars have noted that the most famous moment in A Trip to the Moon plays with temporal continuity by showing an event twice. First, the capsule is shown suddenly appearing in the eye of an anthropomorphic moon. Then, in a much closer shot, the landing occurs very differently, and much more realistically, with the capsule
actually plummeting into believable lunar terrain. This kind of non-linear storytelling, in which time and space are treated as repeatable and flexible rather than linear and causal, is highly unconventional by the standards of Griffith and his followers, before the development of continuity editing. However, other filmmakers performed similar experiments with time. Later in the 20th century, with sports television's development of the instant replay, temporal repetition again became a familiar device to screen audiences. Because Méliès does not use a modern cinematic vocabulary, some film scholars have created other frameworks of thought with which to assess his films. For example, some recent academicians, while not necessarily denying Méliès's influence on film, have argued that his works are better understood as spectacular theatrical creations rooted in the 19th century stage tradition of the féerie. Similarly, Tom Gunning has argued that to fault Méliès for not inventing a more intimate and cinematic storytelling style is to misunderstand the purpose of his films. In Gunning's view, the first decade of film history may be considered a cinema of attractions, in which filmmakers experimented with a presentational style based on spectacle and direct address rather than on intricate editing. Though the attraction style of filmmaking declined in popularity in favor of a more integrated story film approach, it remains an important component of certain types of cinema, including science fiction films, musicals, and avant-garde films. Themes. With its pioneering use of themes of scientific ambition and discovery, A Trip to the Moon is sometimes described as the first science fiction film. A Short History of Film argues that it codified many of the basic generic situations that are still used in science fiction films today. However, several other genre designations are possible. Méliès himself advertised the film as a piece of grand spectacle, a term referring to a type of spectacular Parisian stage extravaganza popularized by Jules Verne and Adolphe Denery in the second half of the 19th century. Richard Abel describes the film as belonging to the féerie genre, as does Frank Kessler. It can also be described simply as a trick film, a catch-all term for the popular early film genre of innovative, special effects-filled shorts, the genre Méliès himself had codified and popularized in his earlier works. A Trip to the Moon is highly satirical in tone, poking fun at 19th-century science by exaggerating it in the format of an adventure story. The film makes no pretense whatsoever to be scientifically plausible. The real waves in the splashdown scene are the only concession to realism. The film's scholar Alison McMahon calls A Trip to the Moon one of the earliest examples of pataphysical film, saying it aims to show the illogicality of logical thinking with its satirically portrayed inept scientists, anthropomorphic moon face, and impossible transgressions of laws of physics. The film historian Richard Abel believes Méliès aimed in the film to invert the hierarchical values of modern French society and hold them up to ridicule in a riot of the carnivalesque. Similarly, the literary and film scholar Edward Wagenknecht described the film as a work satirizing the pretensions of professors and scientific societies, while simultaneously appealing to man's sense of wonder in the face of an unexplored universe. There is also a strong anti-imperialist vein in the film's satire. The film's scholar Matthew Solomon notes that the last part of the film is especially forceful in this regard. He argues that Méliès, who had previously worked as an anti-boulangist political cartoonist, mocks the imperialistic domination in the film by presenting his colonial conquerors as bumbling pedants who mercilessly attack the alien life forms. They meet and return with a mistreated captive amid fanfares of self congratulation. The statue of Barbenfouillis shown in the film's final shot even resembles the pompous, bullying colonialists in Méliès's political cartoons. The film's scholar Elizabeth Ezra agrees that Méliès mocks the pretensions of colonialist accounts of the conquest of one culture by another, and adds that his film also thematizes social differentiation on the home front, as the hierarchical patterns on the moon are shown to bear a curious resemblance to those on Earth. Release. Méliès, who had begun a trip to the moon in May 1902, finished the film in August of that year and began selling prints to French distributors in the same month. From September through December 1902, a hand-colored print of A Trip to the Moon was screened at Méliès's Théâtre Robert Houdin in Paris. The film was shown after Saturday and Thursday matinee performances by Méliès's colleague and fellow magician Jules Eugene Legris, who appeared as the leader of the parade in the two final scenes. Méliès sold black and white and color prints of the film through his Star Film Company, where the film was assigned the catalogue number 399 to 411 and given the descriptive subtitle Piece of Grand Spectacle en 30 tableaux. In France, black and white prints sold for 560 francs, and hand-colored prints for 1,000 francs. Méliès also sold the film indirectly through Charles Urban's Warwick Trading Company in London. Many circumstances surrounding the film, including its unusual budget, length, and production time, as well as its similarities to the 1901 New York attraction, indicate that Méliès was especially keen to release the film in the United States. Because of rampant film piracy, Méliès never received most of the profits of the popular film. One account reports that Méliès sold a print of the film to the Paris photographer Charles Gershel for use in an Algiers theatre, under strict stipulation that the print only be shown in Algeria. Gershel sold the print, and various other Méliès films, to the Edison Manufacturing Company employee Alfred C. Abadi, who sent them directly to Edison's laboratories to be duplicated and sold by Vitagraph. Copies of the print spread to other firms, and by 1904 Siegmund Lubin, the Selig Polyscope Company, and Edison were all redistributing it. Edison's print of the film was even offered in a hand-colored version available at a higher price, just as Méliès had done. Méliès was often uncredited altogether for the first 6 months of the film's distribution. The only American exhibitor to credit Méliès in advertisements for the film was Thomas Lincoln Talley, who chose the film as the inaugural presentation of his Electric Theatre. In order to combat the problem of film piracy that became clear during the release of A Trip to the Moon, Méliès opened an American branch of the Star Film Company, directed by his brother Gaston Méliès, in New York in 1903. The office was designed to sell Méliès's films directly and to protect them by registering them under United States copyright. The introduction to the English-language edition of the Star Film Company catalog announced, "In opening a factory and office in New York, we are prepared and determined energetically to pursue all counterfeiters and pirates. We will not speak twice, we will act." In addition to the opening of the American branch, various trade arrangements were made with other film companies, including American Mutascope and Biograph, the Warwick Trading Company, the Charles Urban Trading Co., Robert W. Paul's Studio, and Gormand. In these negotiations, a print sale price of 15 cents per foot was standardized across the American market, which proved useful to Méliès. However, later price standardizations by the Motion Picture Patents Company in 1908 hastened Méliès's financial ruin. His films were impractically expensive under the new standards. In addition, in the years following 1908 his films suffered from the fashions of the time, as the fanciful magic films he made were no longer in vogue.